Hi, and welcome to the Koru podcast, episode 3, with me, Chris Skorer from Koru Education, and Ceilidh Leisure from Leisure Literature. And I got that right first time, Ceilidh.
You did. It's only taking you 3 attempts, Chris. That's fine. I think that's learning. That's learning and growing. We love it.
It is indeed growth mindset. Well, listen, as some of you will already know, the News Roundup podcast is all about picking out a few salient articles from the educational news and having a little bit of a chat about them, the things that get under our skin, create bees in our bonnet, etc., etc. And it's really interesting because although Ceilidh and I are friends, we don't always agree on everything.
No,
and part of that is a little bit of an age difference, perhaps. And yeah, so here we go. Let's get started. Ceilidh, this is, I think this is your article about Tories vowing to create more AP places to reduce disruption. Do you want to tell me what AP places are for listeners that maybe aren't sure in different parts of the world before we sort of head off into this?
For sure. So we're looking at it's alternative provision. Is AP effectively. So we're looking at different places outside your regular classroom for students for a number of different reasons, often linked to behavioral needs, and this article really got my goat, which I try to go through life as quite a
You're generally quite mild-mannered as well.
I try to be, but yeah, this one really got to me.
Let loose. This is the place to do it, Ceilidh. Go for it.
So I feel like, having witnessed, we were talking about it just yesterday, I've been, in and out of the classroom my whole life as a student, but for 17 years at this point as a student teacher and then a teacher. And I have witnessed firsthand how much the Tories have taken away from education, specifically in terms of funding for AP placements. And in the last year and a half, since the Labour government got into place, they have increased funding AP places by 13%, because we were at record high numbers of students needing them and record low numbers of places. Michael Gove, I want to say something really rude about him.
Man,
misinformed human.
Experts on his own admission.
An uninformed human went across and started pulling funding out of all of the things that we needed for supporting these students, both in AP places and without, and started giving all these contracts to private systems that didn't work and didn't give the number of places. And now, magically out of nowhere, we need to reduce disruption. No, you've been creating it over the last 20 years. You've been underfunding, you've been pulling out knowledge, you've stopped teachers from getting what they need, and now the Labour government aren't doing it. No, you were the ones. It makes me
in the interest of this not becoming a partly political broadcast, no, that's fine. It's good to have a rant, and it's good to share those passions. I think sometimes perhaps society is a little too polite occasionally, but let's look at this a little bit. I've got a little bit of a concern around this idea of AP places, and the philosophy that underpins it within the Conservative Party, particularly this idea that we pursue order over and above inclusion. What's your take on that, and how do we manage inclusion? Because quite often that format of inclusion can come at the expense of the orderly members of your classroom, if you like.
I agree in theory, and that's one of the other reasons why I'm it's as a holistic rant. My rant is quite holistic, because it's not just about creating more spaces where we can send students who are disrupting the average classroom. It's about making sure that we have adequate provisions for our child and adolescent mental health, that the LEAs have the money that they need to support kids in school. It's about recognizing that a lot of SEN and pupil premium students require slightly different things, and we need the funding from that. And it is that funding that went first, followed by these lack of places, and then we ended up with we are in a bit of a real educational pickle, and I get it.
Yeah, okay. But for any of our international listeners, it's worth noting that there has been a history in the UK where we've seen inclusion actually take the form of internal segregation in the interest of order, and we've possibly historically not been that great at addressing the issues behind some of those problems and challenges, and a big part of that is it would be fair to say is a resource choice. I've got a little bit of a sort of perspective on this, and it forms a theme in many of the keynotes that I've done, and that is that we should do away with the whole concept of SEND diagnoses and things like that, and IEPs, because all kids learn in slightly different ways, and we should be meeting them all where they are with their particular needs, and we sort of bracket them off into convenient administrative areas, because that then allows us to kind of do that internal segregation, if you like, historically. And I sort of wonder if ultimately, if we just made class sizes smaller and let teachers do their magic, then maybe they would find a way to work with Bob and Martha and Fred and Jane and work their way through that and understand that kind of background. And I think that's a utopian view from a man that works in a shed at the bottom of the garden in Newcastle, and I don't have to manage the budgets within a school anymore.
I think that's right, and I think I think in an ideal world, with ideally all amazing staff in your school who have all been expertly trained, yeah, it would be wonderful. I do also believe that having IEPs, as was, having specialist provision and having that written down gives a right because there is a recognized need, and sometimes that is really, really valuable. Going back to this Tory's vow to create more AP places, I think there's a number of things here. I think, one, disruption at all costs. They're talking about students who, as soon as a student is violent towards another student, they're out. They're out where? What are we doing? And we need to.
I read this and I see teachers. I see them putting kids in a cage, essentially.
And that's not what I want either. That's not what I think is a good idea. And I think all behavior is communication. And sometimes we need places for students to feel safe, and sometimes that might be alternative provision so that they can get back on track. But it is not about excluding all the students who create waves in our classroom. That's not what I want. I want good funding, good training, and everything from the ground up. And I don't think that's what they're doing. This is a nonsense article. Somebody with buzzwords. I hate it.
When I read this, and I obviously I know the background of the sort of Conservative Party in the UK, and I know about their sort of their voting base, and I know how this appeals to them. And it's that idea of going back to the 3 R's: spare the rod and spoil the child kind of concept. And I think all it does is it just creates problems for the future if you don't try to understand children. To do that, absolutely, you need resource. And you need training and expertise, and that idea that social order comes before everything.
We know better. We know so much more about the brain and about the developing brain, about the child's brain now than we did, in the Victorian era, where everybody sat up straight and wrote on little boards in front of them. We know better. We need to do better. I don't think this article does any better.
Yeah, but I think it probably appeals to a certain tranche of voters that the Conservative Party are trying to woo back to the ballot box, perhaps. I think that's probably the point at which we should leave it, and maybe move on to the next article.
Let's go.
Okay. Here we go. Anyone would think this was planned, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
This was an article that I really liked, and it was in the Times Ed, and it was about how true inclusion cuts exclusions. And it's that idea of what actually constitutes true inclusion in a school.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there is a propensity when you're under the cosh to get through the syllabus, get through the content, deliver on X, Y, and Z. You've got people coming in to observe you, and you don't want your classroom to be a zoo or anything like that. And you kind of you crave that order and control. And actually, some of the best classes that I've ever seen have been a little looser than that. They've been a bit more fluid. And I wonder if maybe there's a way to sort of bring real inclusion in rather than that kind of internal segregation that we run the risk of. You even see it in classrooms where kids with SEND are given separate tasks or in a separate part of the room.
I remember being at school and being on a table with all other people who required extra assistance for reading and maths, and I think my teacher did it with this great interest of like, oh well, they'll sit with the assistant and they'll be fine, but actually everybody else got to sit with their friends and I didn't, and it's really damaging.
And just put a dunce hat on your head as well to walk around school for your friends and contemporaries to sort of see. That's the damage that flows from something like that can last a lifetime.
I
so
think
how
it's
is
true.
it about including kids and balancing that against that need for order in order to deliver your content and your curriculum?
So I did dig into this specific article quite a bit and found out a little bit about the school and about where they are within the UK, size and whatnot, and they do have a slightly higher than average proportion of free school meals and things like that. But the thing that kind of stood out to me out of all these things that they've rolled out, all of these policies that they do talk briefly about in this article, was restorative behavioral practices.
Love it.
And that I think is really like that's the sand in the middle of the pearl, right? That is what you can have on the outside, as we've seen in many schools, your branding, your slogan, what our mission statement is, but actually the thing that seems to be making the difference in this school is that they have trained their staff in restorative practice, and that is key. And I think worth probably mentioning at this point the difference between like a traditional education kind of model versus a restorative practice is that in a normal classroom, quote unquote, behavior that is met with punishment. So if student steps out of line, it's reactive. It's you don't do this, detention. You don't do this, demerit. It's that reactive. We want to punish a behavior, whereas a restorative practice approach is about that kind of pre moment. It's about building those relationships. It's about getting those routines in place so that you automatically have those systems kind of there and ready to go for the students day to day, but also throughout the school. And then when things do go wrong, because they will go wrong, because we're learning, right? That's what happens. You repair what's happened, and that's really interesting to me.
This really caught my eye because actually I used to work at a boarding school in China, and I was housemaster of the naughty boys boarding house. The guys that were in my boarding house were brilliant. They were great sportsmen. They were great company, but they were naughty, perennially naughty. And we introduced a restorative justice model where we didn't punish because punishment wasn't going to work. They were too strong-willed. They would just dig their heels in. So what we did was we introduced this restorative justice model. And when something happened, something went wrong, kids fought or what have you, we would just sit down. We had a couple of couches at the end of the boarding corridor that were cozy couches. We'd bring a cup of tea out and we'd just have a chat with the people that were involved. How did this make you feel? Why did you do that? What was the net result? Could we have done something different? Kind of thing. And the really interesting thing was that it took about 3 months and then the teachers didn't have to be involved. The kids were doing this themselves, and they were resolving their issues by addressing that through that modeled behavior. And in the first instance, it was very time consuming, but it started to yield results. That house stopped being the naughty boys boarding house and started being something so much better. And I think that probably set those boys up for their adult life in many respects.
I think there is a lot to that, and I think it is quite time intensive. I appear to have frozen in the video. Sorry about that, but I'm still here. You can still hear me, right?
I can still hear you.
Beautiful. So I think it is quite time intensive, but it is teaching. It is teaching somebody how to restore and repair. And you need those skills, not just in school, but in life. If you're only ever met with, when I do something wrong, I get punished, that's how you're going to treat other humans. But it's not how it works in the real world. Somebody doesn't give you the work, at deadline, when you're 25 and you work in an office, you're not going to punish them, are you? You have to learn to repair and restore and reintegrate and reflect and change. And so I think this is I really thought what they were doing at Greenwood was good. I would love to see some data, like some more data coming out of the school. I know they said that they had like exclusions, external exclusions, I think, and internal were down by quite a significant amount. But I would love to see, some more long-term data as to how this is working.
I think as well, there's a little bit more to it than just the sort of necessarily the outcomes that are measurable and things like that. I think there's a philosophy angle on this, in that as teachers, we should be optimistic about the youngsters that are in our care, and that perhaps we have that duty to be optimistic with them and give them every chance they can to find the right path. And punishing, all it does is, particularly those that are strong-willed and clever, they will really dig their heels in around punishment, and it will actually do the opposite of what you wanted to achieve. It'll create enmity and all of the negative stuff. It's an interesting one, and I love the idea of being optimistic about the youngsters in our care. And I think that if we give them the tools, the vast majority of them will do wonderful things and grow up into wonderful people.
100%.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, we're coming towards the end of our podcast, and this is an article. I think you put it forward, and it really struck a chord. It's interesting because you and I are from slightly different generations, and I did most of my stupid stuff before camera phones were invented. Thank the Lord. And I'm not about to admit to anything directly on here, but I suspect it wouldn't have done my career a great deal of good if my youth had been recorded. And I saw this about the education head apologizing after making some insulting comments. What's your take on this, Ceilidh?
I feel like, I was looking for controversy this week, and I seem to have found it. I don't know. I think there are a lot of these stories out there with people saying things that seem to be counterintuitive or not very well informed.
The dreaded hot mic.
Absolutely, the dreaded off mic, and I don't want to launch on somebody who made a comment off the cuff. Like that's not fair. We all, I think you've said it. We all say things that we don't necessarily mean. However, it did go to show me, that even somebody as an education head hasn't got a really broad and holistic view of what's happening in specifically music classes in this sense. It's not just about whether a child can bash out Merry Christmas on the glockenspiel. Music education is so much more than that. It's to do with brain development, auditory systems. It helps with your phonological awareness. It's regular music lessons train different parts of the brain that we don't even at this point, we don't know what they do for other areas of language and mathematics. There are all sorts of outcomes in other areas that come from music education, and it just made me sad that we still got this very narrow view of the 3 R's, or 3 W's, whatever it is, reading, writing, and arithmetic. That's it.
Yeah, I wonder about that. Is a momentary comment like that really a reflection of the lady's views? Is it just one of those things where you're venting a little bit, maybe even making a slightly tongue-in-cheek comment? I suppose as an education head, you carry a burden of responsibility, but with that goes an enormous amount of pressure. And, if you have an unguarded moment where you say something, that's one thing. That's quite different to if you say something publicly and use that as part of your public persona. The stuff that I've said to friends unofficially off the record, that's not really been seriously meant, but it's maybe been a way of just venting some frustration. And things like that. And I kind of feel for, and I remember the story of Gordon Brown getting in the car after he'd seen an old lady and talking about her pension, and he slated her in one shape or another. And he'd probably been on the road for 3 or 4 days campaigning. He was tired. He got in the car, thought he was in a safe space, and he offloaded a little. And you see it with kids as well. They hold it together at school. They get home into their safe space, and then they offload, and they give that stress and that grief, and that's not really who they are. And I just wonder if maybe, unless it's an official comment that's being made, maybe we should grant people that sort of social space and safe space to download, vent, that kind of thing. You don't agree, I suspect.
I can see where you're coming from, and I think it is important to have that downtime and that off space, especially if you're in the public eye. I do think you need to be extremely careful if you're making comments that are linked to your work, that show that just show that your knowledge or your understanding is a little lacking. And I think also, I'm just going to dig in here. People are going to hate me for this, but I love it. Her apology wasn't a real apology. If and I do it, I say things that are incorrect all the time. I'm sure people are going to react to my earlier comments in this podcast. If I offend someone, or if I say something that on reflection I didn't mean, I need to apologize in a clear and understandable way. What I don't need to do is say, I'm sorry that you interpreted that. No.
Sorry you felt that way.
I'm sorry you felt that way. No. My actions were wrong. My comment was wrong. And I apologize for it. Because that's also a growth moment. I don't know, maybe I'm expecting too much. Who knows? I do accept it as a throwaway comment, but the wording of I can see how it could be misinterpreted.
Should educators carry a higher burden in terms of these sorts of things? Do they have to act with more integrity in the same way that we wouldn't necessarily expect politicians to anymore, but we would like politicians to operate with that higher level of integrity? Judges, that sort of strata of professional. Should educators carry that slightly higher threshold than the rest of society in terms of what's expected of them?
I don't know about the should. I think we do, because our words are powerful, and because we use them to influence, the lives of the people in our care every day. they carry a certain weight. It's like, you know, the quote from Dumbledore. Your words are our most profound source of magic, capable of inflicting injury and for curing. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
I think you have to hold to that.
I think that's probably a fair point, and it's maybe moved my position on this a little in that, yeah, maybe we should have a higher level of expectation around us as educators, because those words, we expect to be able to influence those around us, and if we're going to do that, we need to have that integrity, even if that comes by way of wholesome apology rather than being without mistakes.
Absolutely, we're always going to make mistakes, but it's how you repair them that really show growth, show humility, show your humanity.
Well, listen, it's been a lovely conversation once again, Ceilidh.
Sorry for my ranting.
No, love it. You know, I think it's important that we exercise some of those demons, we get some of those ideas out there, and perhaps invite a few comments from the listeners. That would be 100%. Fabulous.
I would love somebody to push back on anything that we've said. Yeah, get in touch with us. That would be super interesting.
We'd love to hear that. Okay, then. Well, listen, lovely speaking to you once again. And we'll catch up in a fortnight.
Yep. See you in a fortnight.
Bye now.